Hey, welcome back, Hawkeye Nation, to a Tuesday morning episode of the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast, your daily podcast covering your Iowa Hawkeyes on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Andrew Wade, and we have a very special guest, a returning member of the show, returning guest of the show, you could say. We are joined by Hawkeye Reports Kyle Huesmann. He's going to be talking about women's college basketball, specifically, obviously, the Iowa women's basketball team. At the end, we're going to hop into a little bit of talk about the Iowa baseball team, but we're breaking down this entire NCAA bracket for the Iowa women's side. I'm trying to give you a full preview of that as that takes place and begins to kick off this upcoming weekend as well. Before we get to all of that, though, I want to thank you all for making the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast your first listen every single day. You can find the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast for free wherever you get podcasts at, and also on YouTube by searching Locked On Hawkeyes. And this episode of Locked On Hawkeyes is brought to you by Stat Hero. Stat Hero is reshaping the way you play fantasy sports. Dozens of house-based games to play daily, no sharks, no funky props, just your skill versus the lineups you choose. Sign up today at stathero.com/lockedon. So before we get into it, Kyle, you're on spring break. How are you doing today, man? How are you feeling? How's everything going for you? Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got
Okay.
it now.
Yeah. How are you doing, man?
I don't. Are we still got? Sorry, I got disconnected for a second. I'm good now. Too bad. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. It's totally fine. I figured it. All of a sudden, it was just completely frozen. I was like, I don't think this is working. But no, you're back. I was just giving an intro. Oh, makes sense.
Right.
Yeah. So I just give an intro. But yeah, let's get into it, man. I'm glad you're doing well. I know you're on spring break, so I appreciate your flexibility and being willing to come on. You have quite a different spring break planned than many college students. You are going to be covering the Iowa women's basketball team as they have hopefully 2 games at Carver Hawkeye Arena this weekend. Before we get into that, though, I want to talk a little bit about National Player of the Year conversation because there's been a lot of debate from everyone outside of the Iowa bubble about whether it should be Elijah Boston or Caitlyn Clark. And everything I see seemingly points towards Elijah Boston. But when you look at what these two players do, statistically speaking, Caitlyn Clark owns her in everything, especially when you try to normalize 4 positions and what each position typically will do. And then you look at the team impact. And I feel like Iowa without Caitlyn Clark is a bubble squad, or not, maybe not a bubble, but somewhere in that range, right? They're not a number 2 seed. And South Carolina without Elijah Boston, probably still a 1 seed, maybe a 2 seed at the worst. So I don't understand what the critics are saying out there about Caitlyn Clark. What is your thoughts? What is your breakdown on that situation?
I mean, Aliyah Boston's obviously a great basketball player. She's obviously one of the best in the nation, so that's why she's in the conversation. Great scorer. Obviously a great rebounder, both offense and defensive boards. But yeah, I mean, when you compare the stats, I mean, Caitlyn Clark's leading the nation in scoring. If she's not leading, she's second. I mean, you talk about what she can do scoring standpoint, whether it's 3-pointers from the range that she has, driving to the hoop, getting fouled, getting to the free throw line, and then her ability to dump off assists to whether it's Monica Sanana or kick it out to Warnock or Gabby Marshall or Kate Martin for a 3. She just does so much for the team, and her impact isn't. I think a lot of people like to just look at the scoring, but it's incredible that she not only leads the nation in scoring, but she leads the nation in assists. So all the baskets that she accounts for in every single game is incredible. And like I said, Aliyah Boston's a great basketball player. Other great players, I know Nalissa Smith from Baylor's in the conversation as well. But I mean, just watching Caitlyn Clark play, and then all the impact she has off the court. When you talk about how many NBA players have talked about her game, just what you see on Twitter after games when Caitlyn goes and makes a logo 3 or something, just all the talk on Twitter, things like that. It's hard to imagine that Aliyah's doing anything near the same for that. I personally don't see Aliyah Boston on Twitter after games. And it's not because I don't follow China fans. It's just because all the big accounts, whether it's Bleacher Report or ESPN or even the NBA players I talked about, they're just not tweeting about Aliyah Boston after games. So I guess that really might not be factored into the debate. whoever's voting for it. But I mean, I think it has to be just not only doing on the court, but what she's doing for women's basketball.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I'm actually going to give two stories I think that kind of highlight the impact of Caitlyn Clark, especially considering the impact she's had within the state for young women, young females all around. My best friend is a huge Iowa fan. He has two daughters. One is, oh man, I think she's turning 5. I think she's might be 4.5 right now, turning 5. He was watching the men's basketball game, and she came up to her or to him, and she's like, why aren't there any women playing? And he's like, oh wait, we got some women playing. And he took her to her first game, which was the Iowa versus Michigan game, and they had an absolute blast. And that was her first entrance into women's basketball, and she loves it now, right? That's super exciting. You look at Caitlyn Clark and her NIL stuff, right? She just came out with a jersey. I have never in my life I don't really purchase basketball jerseys in general, but I have never purchased a women's basketball jersey. And that is not a knock on that. It's just not at the top of my mind. I don't watch a ton of women's basketball, but I watch every Iowa women's basketball game. And now I'm pre-ordered for Caitlyn Clark's jersey because it's first of all, it's a sick jersey. Second of all, she's just a phenomenal player. And what this women's team is doing is just so fun to watch. It's fun to be an Iowa Hawkeye fan right now. But let's get into the tournament. This year and every year, really, there's a lot of disparity between the top seeds and the lower seeds. And I think specifically those number 1 seeds and the number 2 seeds, there's quite a difference between those typically. We saw it with Iowa a few years ago with Megan Gustafson taking on Baylor. Iowa wasn't in the same league as, to be fair, as those 1 seeds. What do you see this year? Is there still that same level of disparity on paper between those 1 and those 2 seeds?
Yeah, I mean, you have South Carolina, you've got NC State. Those are very good teams. I would say they're probably a little bit better than the 2 seeds and more to 3 and 4s like that. But not the same as every year. It's to me, from women's basketball this year, it's not the type of tournament where it's been the last, 10, 15, really since the beginning, where it feels like, maybe it's Connecticut or a Baylor where they just go out and can beat everybody. And it's really like you're going to win until they get to the national championship type thing. I don't feel like it's like that this year. I feel like there could be someone that loses before, the Final Four type deal this year. I think women's basketball this year has a lot than it ever has. And the players at Iowa have talked about that this year. Just Caitlyn, I know she watches a lot of women's basketball outside of the games, obviously. And she said that she thinks this year's a little bit different, where it seems like there's a few more upsets. I mean, South Carolina lost to Missouri, is playing as an 11 seed this year, I believe. Miami beat Louisville, and Miami's a 9 seed. So Kentucky also beat South Carolina in the SEC, and Kentucky's a 6 seed. So I mean, there have been some games this year where upsets have happened. So I think the 1 seeds are better, but I wouldn't just pencil them into the Final Four like you usually can.
Yeah, I mean, usually you look at that bracket and you just chalk it up. You basically take your higher seeds for the most part, barring any inside information you might have from watching the women's games. But it's a little bit different this year. And I want to talk about that because when you look at Iowa's, kind of path to probably facing South Carolina, barring an upset, it's not just chalk, right? It's not just this easy. Consider Iowa to be in the Elite Eight because they are the number 2 seed, which you can sometimes do with some of those top seeds. I want to talk about that here in a few short moments. But first, Kyle, I know we both love this. We love March Madness. March Madness is this week, but I honestly cannot remember a single time where I actually won any money on my March Madness bracket. I literally lose every single time. I'm like, this is a great day. The first 3 games I hit, and I'm a genius. And then I literally lose the next 16 upsets, and all of a sudden my bracket's broken and March Madness and the brackets kind of stink. But that's why I am hedging my bets this year with Stat Heroes NCAA Pick'em contest. Stat Heroes NCAA single game Pick'em pits the star players against each other in an amazing hybrid between fantasy and sports gambling. Take control back from those handicappers that always seem to have the advantage and start focusing on the players you know the best with a gameplay that doesn't rely on big spreads, long odds, or funky props. Stat Hero gives you the advantage of resulting in their gamers winning 4 times more often. Why? Because Stat Hero eliminates the mystery about who or what you're going up against. Basically, They post a set of players, and you pick a set of players to play against them. It's that easy. This is what daily fantasy was meant to be. So go to stathero.com/lockedon and sign up today for free right now and use the promo code LOCKEDON for a 100% deposit match. That's stathero.com/lockedon. Use promo code LOCKEDON for a 100% deposit match. stathero.com/lockedon. Promo code LOCKEDON. Terms and conditions apply. And thank you again for making the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast your first listen every single day. Make sure to check out our Locked On Bracket Breakdown, which posted yesterday right here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast feed and YouTube channel. College basketball experts Chris Gordy, Andy Patton, and betting expert Lee Sterling give you in-depth breakdowns on every single matchup. That's on the men's side, but we are here talking about the women's side. Kyle, we talked a little bit about the 1 versus 2 seed disparity. Now I want to talk about the path that Iowa has to get to South Carolina. It starts with Illinois State, who won the Missouri Valley Conference tournament as a 4 seed. So not exactly it should relatively be an easier game for Iowa, especially playing at Carver. That's how that first game should be for those round of 64 games, especially for a 2 seed. After that, though, they get a Creighton or a Colorado team, both teams ranked in the top 35, according to the net ranking. Quality opponents, nonetheless, that you're getting in that second round. After that, you're probably getting Iowa State, which I really don't like them putting Iowa State on our side of the bracket. As a state of Iowa fan, I would love to see Iowa State have an opportunity to go far as well, and I don't want to see those two teams cannibalize themselves in the tournament. After that, you're getting South Carolina more than likely. What was your initial reaction to Iowa getting a 2 seed and Iowa's draw with this bracket?
Yeah, I think the 2 seed was a little, and actually to me it was very surprising. I had written an article basically that they were locked in as a 3 seed. I just didn't see them moving up to a 2 seed, especially over Iowa State, a team that they lost to earlier in the year. But the big reason was just the way they ended the season, a 7-game win streak. 6 of those games were quad 1 wins. You're talking about beating Indiana 3 times. That's very hard to do when they've been a top 15 team all season. At the win against Michigan. They had a win against Nebraska in the 10 tournament. So that's really why they got moved up to a 2 was just the end this season. So that was surprising. Looking at the draw, though, I mean, Illinois State in the first round, like you said, they won the MVC. They were a 4 seed. They're a pretty good team. They're 321st in pace of play. So they're not a team that likes to get out. Iowa will try to get out early in the game, use their transition game. And if they can get up early in the game, it shouldn't be a big deal. Be able to win pretty handily. What you said, what you expect from a 2-15 matchup. You shouldn't have to try that hard necessarily because you're supposed to be rewarded for the season that you had. Going forward, Colorado and Creighton it's interesting if you get Creighton because that is a team that Iowa scrimmages yearly. It's a close scrimmage they do. So Iowa knows Creighton personnel, probably some of their not necessarily days, but they know what they like to run, whether it's offense and defense. Those close scrimmages aren't games. They're stopped because they want to work on different things. So if they do get an interesting matchup, because they probably do know a lot about them, the Colorado would be tough. I know they beat Arizona this year. So they've beat a couple of highly ranked teams, Colorado yet. I'm planning to go to that game on Friday, Colorado and Creighton, to get a better look at them. And then you mentioned looking further ahead, you look at Iowa State in the Sweet 16. Georgia's another one in that's going to Ames for that regional. That's going to be a tough game for Iowa State. And if they were to beat Iowa State, I think that would be a tough game for Iowa just because from what I've heard, Georgia likes to play a physical game, which is not the type of game that Iowa or Iowa State likes to play. So I think that's going to be a tough matchup for Iowa State. And if it happens to be Iowa, I think that could be a tough matchup for them as well. But yeah, getting back to the Cy-Hawk potential rematch in the Sweet 16, you can look at it 2 ways. Like you said, you'd like to have a chance to get further and not have those out. But on the other hand, when you look at just the headlines that would go with that game, it would be incredible to see those 2 teams in the Sweet 16. And the impact it would have for Iowa would be much of the same as they made a deep tournament run. Just to see those 2 teams match up in the Sweet 16 and what that means for the state to have that type for 2 in-state teams. And you're talking about the Sweet 16, not just a regular season matchup. That would be an interesting matchup. I'll probably be down there in Greensboro for that game. So I will say I'm kind of rooting for that matchup just so I can go down there. But I don't think the draw is super hard. I think it's easier, obviously, but a tournament, so you expect some of those tough games.
Yeah, absolutely. Great way of breaking that all down. Talking about the Iowa State game, it would be interesting, right? I really love the way women's basketball does it, where the top 4 seeds get home games. I think that really emphasizes trying to get up to that 4 seed line. And I love the fact that Iowa gets 2 games at Carver, especially because I think Iowa has one of the best home court advantages in the entire country. Carver can get absolutely rocking. We saw that Iowa versus Michigan, so a really good, advantageous opportunity for the Hawks. Iowa versus Iowa State in the Sweet 16. I know they'll be in Greensboro, but can you imagine that game being played at like Wells Fargo or something like that? Wells Fargo is still around. I haven't been in Des Moines in a long time. It's still Wells Fargo, right?
Yeah.
I think yeah. Can you imagine having that game played at Wells Fargo and just how crazy that atmosphere would be? I wish the women's tournament could do that. That would be a lot of fun. Obviously, it wouldn't be feasible because Iowa State would turn around and have to go to South Carolina a day later to play in that game. But anyways, definitely an interesting matchup. How do you feel like what has changed for Iowa versus Iowa State since they met up earlier on in the season and Iowa fell to Iowa State 77-70 back in early December?
Well, I haven't followed Iowa State a lot after the game, just kind of what they've been doing. So obviously, they're a 3 seed, which means they've had a very successful, projected a 2 seed for most of the season, and they were in the top 10 for most of the season. So they've had a really good season. And Iowa lost that game. The thing with Iowa at that point was they were still stopping and starting through most of that season with COVID, whether it was on their end or on someone else's end. They had finals week in there, so they had another stretch where they didn't play. So I think the big thing there was Iowa had to play that game when they weren't really consistently playing games, which isn't an excuse to lose that game. But that is really what it was. They were just not consistently playing games. So now that I was getting that, they're on their bed now. Obviously, 7 wins in a row. Like I mentioned, 6 of them are quad 1 wins. So they're beating very good teams. I mean, you look at the of someone like Monica Stana, obviously near the top of the country in field goal percentage. But what she's done over the is she's almost shooting 80% from the floor. So she's decent, but this last stretch in particular has been even better. Martin, the play that she's had over the last few games, she's been great the whole season, going kind of unnoticed, but she's really stepped in a bigger role here over the last few games. Obviously, you got McKenna Warren injury, so I think everything's really coming together for Iowa right now. So I think the big thing that's changed from the season when they played Iowa State is just the consistency to play a lot of games in a row and stopping and starting. But as a team, they're playing their best basketball right now.
Absolutely. And when you look at that game back in December, there wasn't a lot of differences between the two teams, right? Neither team shot particularly well. Iowa actually outshot Iowa State 40% to 38%, even outshot them at 3-pointers. The biggest difference here was free throws. Iowa had 20 fouls. Iowa State had 12. Iowa State converted 16 of their 22 free throws. Iowa converted 5 of their 6 free throws. Now it's worth noting that was at Hilton. So an away game, who knows kind of what happened there with some of those items as well. Definitely an interesting matchup. It'll be a lot of fun for the state if Iowa does play Iowa State. It's going to be interesting to see how Iowa can kind of go throughout this tournament and see how far they get. And we're going to talk about that. I want to get your predictions for Iowa in this NCAA tournament. How far do you think they can go? What do you feel like has to go right for them to get there? What do you feel like would go wrong that would cause them to not get there? And then we're going to talk about the Iowa baseball team because they have a ton of talent on that team. And you also cover them for Hawkeye Report as well. Before we get to that, though, March Madness is this week. That means you need to start thinking now about where you're going to be running your brackets this year. Are you going for the usual or are you looking for the best? We've done our homework here and we are running our brackets with runyourpool.com. Along with standard brackets, Run Your Pool offers game types like Survivor or Pickaxe. They have options to edit scoring and they offer more intel to make your picks. All stuff you won't find at ESPN or CBS. If you've got a business, Run Your Pool can help you take some of the madness magic and play alongside your employees or even gain new customers. Plus, they offer full white glove customer support, custom branding, and one of the easiest 3-minute setups you'll ever find. Clearly, we believe in Run Your Pool because, like I said, we are running our brackets there ourselves. There is literally no truer test than that. If you want to play against us for a shot at a cash prize up to $1,800, join us at runyourpool.com/lockedon. And while you're there, create your own pool for your friends and family. Enter Pure Madness at checkout for $10 off your custom pool. All the rules and details will be available there. That's runyourpool.com/lockedon for your chance to win a cash prize up to $1,800. We look forward to seeing and beating you there. And it is that time of year again, y'all. We are literally at days away from March Madness. In fact, we have playing games today. That means you got to go make some extra money in your pocket, but that means you got to go to betonline.net. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, betonline.net is the #1 source for all of your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And with March Madness going on, you might have some brackets in place, but maybe you want to put a little extra money in your pocket on each of these games. Maybe you see an opportunity, an advantage, right? We have Indiana. We also have Rutgers playing in these playing games. Those are some opportunities. Do you believe in the Big Ten? Maybe you put some money on them. Maybe you want to put some money on Iowa to go deep in this tournament, maybe go to the Final Four, maybe to go to the national championship game. Get your odds right there at betonline.net. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. So head over to their website today or use your mobile device and learn more about the trends in action. That's betonline.net, where the game starts. So, Kyle, we've talked about the different matchups Iowa has. I want to get your thoughts on how far does Iowa go in this tournament? What is your prediction for the Hawkeyes in this NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the bracket, I think there's opportunities to have some tough games along the way before you talk about Elite Eight, Final Four. Obviously, we talked about Colorado and Creighton, both very talented teams. You could see either one in the second round. Then you talked about the possibility of Iowa State or Georgia in the Sweet 16. Both of those would be very tough matchups, obviously. Once you look down the road, Elite Eight would be South Carolina, as long as South Carolina doesn't get upset, which, I mean, Arizona's in there, and they're part of the bracket. I don't think Arizona could beat them. You get to that Iowa-South Carolina matchup, and that's a very tough matchup. It's hard to say because, until you see them on the court. South Carolina, like I said, has lost a couple of games they've lost to Missouri, who was on the bubble. They lost to Kentucky recently, who was a 7-6 seed. So they've lost a couple of games against some lower seeded teams. So that's not to say that Iowa couldn't beat them, because like we talked about earlier, this isn't a year where the 1 seed is just going to go to the Final Four. South Carolina has lost to a couple of those lower seeded teams. So it shows that they can lose. That would be a very tough matchup. I think you'd really need a big game from Caitlyn Clark. Aliyah Boston would probably have to get into some foul trouble. It's hard to say. I don't want to make a prediction on that type of game, but I think the Elite Eight is definitely a spot that they can make it to, because Iowa State's a very beatable team. Georgia's a beatable team. And then you talked about, like I said, Colorado and Creighton, very beatable teams. So I think Elite Eight is definitely a possibility. And then once you get to that game, it's Iowa, South Carolina for a spot in the Final Four. So that's an Elite Eight would be a great run. I know Caitlyn Clark and the entire team really wants to make a Final Four. But like I said, you get to that Elite Eight spot, it's anyone's game at that point.
Yeah, I'm looking at this roster, right, for South Carolina, and just the size is what really stands out to me. And that was the issue even when we saw Iowa take on Baylor a couple of years ago. It was the pure size that they have. It's just such an advantage. Monica is a phenomenal post player, but she's not 6'5". She's not 6'7". And at a certain degree, that size does matter. And when you have size like that across the entire lineup, it can make those matchups a little bit more difficult. We saw Iowa versus Maryland, I believe it was, earlier on in this year. They really impacted Caitlyn Clark quite a bit because they had athletic guards with some size who were able to handle Caitlyn Clark 3 to 4 feet in front of the three-point line and not allow her to get some of those, logo shots off as much as she would like to do. I would agree with you, though, that this is a game when you have a size advantage like South Carolina does, you're going to need some phenomenal guard play to keep you in. You're going to need a next level national player of the year type of game from Caitlyn Clark to be able to get you through there. It is not impossible, right? We've seen this Iowa women's basketball team shoot the three ball really well. We've seen Caitlyn Clark be able to find those women and get them opportunities as well. Gabby Marshall can hit her shot, Kate Martin, McKenna Warnock. So lots of opportunity there. Definitely an interesting situation we have coming up. So quickly, to get to the next piece before we go to Iowa baseball, if Iowa were to lose in the Sweet 16 or not make it out of the Sweet 16, what do you feel like went wrong?
Yeah, I think it's going to be kind of the 2 points that I've been talking about all season in my articles, and that's in the defensive boards. If you turn the ball over a lot, they've done that in games where they've given other teams opportunities to score off turnovers. And then the other thing is allowing teams to get offensive rebounds. It seems like such a simple thing, kind of like me getting out of it easy to just go turnovers and offensive rebounding. That really is the big point with this team. And times where Iowa loses, you look at the points off turnovers, the second chance points, and those are the things that hurt them. So they're gonna have to box out. They're getting shots up, which they've been doing better times during this run, and then handling the ball, being clean with the ball, which they did really during the Big Ten tournament against Nebraska and Indiana. They did a good job of that. And then really, when you talk about turnovers, Caitlyn Clark. As of late, some starts where she comes out a little hyped up in games she doesn't need to make. That's just a big thing. If she can come into a game settled down, when you talk about a Sweet 16 game against an Iowa State or an Elite 8 game against South Carolina, getting off to a good start where you don't a bunch of turnovers and getting yourself full, that'll be the big thing for them. So if they were to lose before that, it would be because they either turned it over too much or they allowed too many second chance points.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed with this women's basketball team is there's a lot of entry passes of wings driving to the lane, and it just seems to kind of go off the hands, right? There's a lot of like you talk about a finesse team, very tough, difficult passes, and sometimes we're just not able to careen those things in, which is unfortunate. But those lead to a lot of turnovers as well. Iowa needs to be able to get their hands on that and then convert at the hoop. I appreciate you. I think those are two very valid things, right? I mean, you want to call it. Maybe those are being easy, but I think those are legit. Those are exactly what Iowa needs to figure out and clean up to be able to make a run in the tournament. So turning our attention, you are a man covering a lot of teams here. You cover the Iowa women's basketball team, but you also cover the Iowa baseball team, and you do a phenomenal job at Hawkeye Report. I want to make sure everyone who's listening to this, when this actually drops, knows that. Definitely check out the stuff you're doing for the Iowa baseball team as well. What is the current state of Iowa baseball? Before we got on the show, I told you I've been trying to follow, but I'll be completely honest, I just don't do as good of a job. Basically, my following is looking at your tweets, and as you kind of tweet the entire game out, I'll follow along that. But the biggest memories that stick out to me is Iowa taking care of business and allowing, I think, like 5 hits on opening weekend and scoring 30 runs against quality mid-major opponents, and then turning around and losing to D3 schools in Iowa. What is the state of Iowa baseball, and what can we expect as Iowa fans for the remainder of the season?
I think the start of the season really showed what this team has the potential to be. Obviously, they don't do that every single weekend, but they showed that they can be a very good team. But since then, they've struggled, really, just from a standpoint of whether it's they give up a few runs or the pitching gives up too many free bases or the hitting just doesn't score enough. That's really been the issue over the last few weeks, is being able to put it together. Going back to last week, they play Wichita State. They lose that game. There were 3, 4, 5 plays actually went down as errors. But if you watch the game, there were plays where you think, man, that's a play that's got to be made. I don't remember what inning. Fly warning track. Braden Frazier goes up. Looks like it's in his glove. He hits the netting that's surrounding the scoreboard there in the outfield. Ball comes out of his glove. Bases were loaded. All 3 runs scored in the game. That's the type of play that it's a tough play, but Rick Keller said after the game that those 4 or 5 plays that really changed the complexion of the game, they're plays that they make. You turn around the next day against Texas A&M, 2 earned runs, and they scored 7. 5 unearned runs in that game. You lose by 4. That's a tough pill to swallow. And then you talk about just free bases in some games costing you games. It's just uncharacteristic. And when you see what they've been able to do with the first 4 games of the season, you see what they can do. It's disappointing to see them not be able to put it together. They've got to find a way here sometime soon because the schedule doesn't get any easier. I mean, you talk about Texas Tech coming in this weekend. You got Central Michigan the next weekend. Then you get into Big Ten play with Michigan, who's a very good so when you talk about NCAA tournament chances, you got to win some of those, building a resume, and you can't dig yourself a hole. So like I said, it's kind of disappointing right now to see how they're playing, because of what I know they can, what I know other fans know that they can do, because they do have a very talented team. So hopefully they definitely have it in them. It's just a matter of cutting down on the free bases if you're the pitching staff, which we've seen them do, and then getting consistent hitting from up and down. Keaton Anthony and Peyton Williams are doing an excellent job. Keaton Anthony is off to an incredible start to the season at the plate, but it's kind of hit or miss on who steps up at the plate. I can't hear you anymore somehow.
I had myself muted. I was trying to, so I did, man, I am struggling today. Kyle, like I said, I appreciate you being on the show. We've had you on several times before. You always do such a great job of dropping a lot of knowledge on the Iowa women's basketball side and also the Iowa baseball side. I want to know, where can folks find all of your work at?
Yeah, on HawkeyeReport.com, IowaRivals.com, I believe is what you're going to be looking for. I'll be posting on there. Women's basketball, they'll be in the NCAA tournament this weekend at Carver, so I'll be there. I'm trying to get as much baseball in as I can. With Texas Tech coming this weekend, I might have to run over from Carver on Friday to catch the last few innings of that Friday game. But I'm doing my best over there, trying to get as much as I can. Hopefully I can catch most of both teams this weekend. IowaRivals.com is where all my stuff will be.
Awesome. And if you are on the YouTube, you can see his Twitter account as well as Huesmann Kyle, or at Huesmann Kyle. So make sure to check that out. He does a great job of breaking down live updates of all the games he is covering. Kyle, appreciate you coming on. We'll have to have you on another time as well. And hopefully you get to go down to Greensboro and have a fantastic time covering an Iowa basketball team making a very impressive run. Thank you all for tuning in to today's episode of the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Again, thank you all for making this your first listen every single day. Now it's time to make your second listen to Locked On NFL Draft podcast, hosted by Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker. They bring the NFL Draft to life every single day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts at. And that will do it today for all the Hawkeye Nation shows we got going on. So have a fantastic day, Hawkeye Nation. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always,